Wealth buys many things, but it cannot buy a mother's heart. When the powerful Duke of Blackwood faked a carriage accident to spy on his beautiful new fiancée, he expected to find a strict disciplinarian. Instead, he uncovered a monster and an unlikely savior hiding in plain sight. The year was 1884, and the towering stone walls of Blackwood Manor, situated on the rugged, wind-swept cliffs of Cornwall, held a heavy silence. Arthur Harrington, the Duke of Blackwood, was a man who possessed half the county, a fortune built on maritime trade, and a heart hardened by profound grief. 3 years prior, his beloved wife, Isabella, had passed away while giving birth to their twin sons, Leo and Theodore. Since that tragic night, Arthur had buried himself in his ledgers and estate management, leaving the boys in the care of a rotating door of nannies. However, society abhors a widowed duke. The relentless pressure from peers, the whisperings of the ton, and the undeniable reality that a sprawling estate required a duchess eventually wore Arthur down. He needed a mother for his boys. Enter Lady Cordelia Belmont. Hailing from the prominent Belmont family of Yorkshire, Cordelia was the picture of aristocratic perfection. She was breathtakingly elegant, with spun gold hair, a perfectly tailored wardrobe, and a pedigree that satisfied the most snobbish of Arthur's relatives. In Arthur's presence, she was the epitome of grace. She would kneel in the pristine gardens, uncaring of the dirt on her silk gowns, to pat the twins on their heads, offering them candied fruits and dazzling smiles. Arthur, blinded by his desperate desire to restore order to his fractured family, proposed within 6 months of their meeting. Yet, as the wedding date approached, a subtle, chilling shift began to occur within the walls of Blackwood Manor. Arthur was an observant man, a trait that had made him a formidable force in the House of Lords. He began to notice the small, unspoken things. Whenever Cordelia entered the nursery, the previously boisterous twins would fall dead silent. Their wooden toy soldiers would be hastily dropped. One evening, while taking tea in the drawing room, Cordelia reached out to affectionately adjust the collar of little Leo's velvet suit. Arthur saw it clearly. The 5-year-old boy violently flinched, his eyes darting to the floor in sheer terror. When Arthur questioned her about it later that night, Cordelia offered a practiced, sympathetic sigh. "Oh, Arthur, darling, they are simply wild boys, unused to a woman's guiding hand. They lack discipline. I am merely trying to instill the manners expected of a duke's sons. They mistake my structured love for severity. Give it time." Her explanation was perfectly reasonable, but Arthur's oldest friend, Lord Harrison Stirling, had recently cornered him at a gentleman's club in London, dropping hushed warnings about rumours from Yorkshire, tales of Cordelia's volatile temper and her family's history of extreme cruelty to their servants. Arthur had dismissed Harrison at the time, but the image of his son flinching burned into his mind. Arthur decided he could not walk down the aisle of Westminster Abbey with a sliver of doubt in his soul. He needed to know the truth. He needed to see Cordelia when the mask was off. Thus, a deception was born. Arthur announced to the household that a sudden, critical issue with his railway investments required an immediate, 2-week departure to Edinburgh. He made a grand spectacle of packing his trunks, kissing Cordelia's hand in the grand foyer, and embracing his quiet, wide-eyed sons. "I leave the manor and my most precious treasures in your capable hands, my dear," Arthur told Cordelia, his voice thick with a fake sorrow. "Do not worry for a moment, Arthur. We shall be a perfect family upon your return," she purred, waving her lace handkerchief as his black carriage rolled down the sweeping gravel drive. But Arthur did not go to Edinburgh. A mile down the road, he ordered his trusted driver to halt. Under the cover of the dense Cornish fog, Arthur slipped out of the carriage and hiked back through the dense pine forests bordering his estate. He bypassed the main gates and made his way to the crumbling east wing of the manor. Blackwood Manor was ancient, built during the tumultuous Tudor era, and it held secrets even the servants did not know. Hidden behind the oak panelling of Arthur's private study was a narrow servants' passage, a relic of the English Reformation designed to hide Catholic priests. This dusty, pitch-black corridor ran between the walls of the main floors, offering concealed peepholes, ornate ventilation grates carved into the crown moulding, directly into the grand parlour, the dining hall, and most importantly, the children's nursery. Arthur secured himself in the claustrophobic space. He had provisions, cured meats, a canteen of water, and a heavy wool blanket. The air was thick with dust and the smell of ancient timber. He positioned himself by the brass grate overlooking the grand parlour. Down below, the heavy oak front doors had barely clicked shut behind Arthur's carriage before Cordelia's performance abruptly ended. Arthur watched, his breath catching in his throat as the dazzling smile vanished from his fiancée's face, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. She turned on her heel, her silk skirts swishing aggressively, and snapped her fingers at the head housekeeper. "Mrs. Higgins, have my trunks moved to the master suite immediately. I am tired of the guest quarters," Cordelia demanded, her voice devoid of its usual melodic sweetness. "But my lady," Mrs. Higgins stammered, "His Grace's chambers are private until the marriage. I am the Duchess of Blackwood in all but name, you insolent old bat," Cordelia shrieked, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Do it, or you will find yourself begging for scraps in the streets of London by nightfall." Arthur's blood ran cold. He remained utterly still in the dark, watching the woman he had almost married reveal the monster lurking beneath her porcelain skin. The true nightmare, however, was only just beginning. The first 2 days of Arthur's hidden vigil were an exercise in sheer, agonizing restraint. From his vantage point in the walls, he witnessed a systematic reign of emotional terror descend upon Blackwood Manor. Cordelia moved through the halls not as a prospective mother, but as a conquering tyrant. On the afternoon of the second day, Arthur crept through the narrow passage until he reached the grate overlooking the boys' nursery. Down below, Leo and Theodore were quietly stacking wooden alphabet blocks on the Persian rug. The door flew open, hitting the wall with a loud crack. Cordelia swept into the room, followed by her close friend, Lady Agatha Fox, who had arrived for a private luncheon. "Look at them, Agatha," Cordelia scoffed, pointing her fan at the boys as if they were a disease. "Filthy little creatures. Arthur spoils them rotten. They are an absolute nuisance." "They are the heirs, Cordelia," Agatha pointed out, sipping from a delicate porcelain teacup. "You must tolerate them until you provide a spare." Cordelia let out a dark, calculating laugh that sent shivers down Arthur's spine. "Heirs? For now. Once I am wed to Arthur and I bear my own sons, I will convince him that these two are too fragile, too undisciplined for estate life. There is a very strict boarding school in the Scottish Highlands. A bleak, miserable place. I have already made preliminary inquiries. They take boys at 6 years old. They will be out of my sight and out of my way." In the wall, Arthur's hands balled into tight fists. His knuckles turned white as he dug his fingernails into his palms to stop himself from kicking through the plaster and strangling the woman on the spot. She was plotting to exile his children to secure her own future offspring's dominance. "You there, boy!" Cordelia barked, stepping forward and intentionally kicking over Theodore's carefully stacked wooden tower. Theodore let out a startled whimper, scrambling backward. "Stop your snivelling. You give me a headache. You are both confined to the attic storage room for the rest of the evening. The sight of you ruins my appetite." But we haven't had supper," Leo, the braver of the twins, whispered, his lower lip trembling. Cordelia's eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "Then consider hunger your first lesson in obedience. March." She had the head footman drag the terrified 5-year-olds up the narrow stairs to the attic, a draughty, unheated space used for storing broken furniture and old trunks. Arthur heard the heavy iron lock click. The sound tore at his soul. He began to move toward the exit of his secret passage. He had seen enough. The wedding was off. Cordelia would be thrown out into the mud tonight. But as he reached for the hidden latch to exit into his study, a flicker of candlelight from the back servant stairs caught his eye through a lower grate. Arthur paused. Moving silently up the narrow wooden steps was Josephine Miller, a 20-year-old parlour maid. Everyone called her Josie. Arthur only vaguely knew her. She was a quiet, unassuming girl, the daughter of a local tin miner who had died in a cave-in. She had been hired 6 months ago to dust the baseboards and polish the silver. She was practically invisible to the upper class. Tonight, however, Josie was not carrying a dusting cloth. She was carrying a heavy wicker basket, covered with a checkered napkin, and a large, thick wool blanket draped over her shoulder. Arthur watched, fascinated, as Josie tiptoed past Cordelia's newly occupied master suite, holding her breath. She crept up to the dark, freezing attic landing. Setting her basket down, she pulled a heavy iron skeleton key from her apron pocket. She had stolen the spare key from the head housekeeper's office. The lock clicked open. Josie slipped inside the freezing room, pulling the door shut behind her. Arthur quickly moved through the wall to the attic's adjacent chimney space, peering through a small crack in the masonry. The 2 boys were huddled together on a dusty rug, shivering violently in the damp Cornish cold, tears streaking their dirty cheeks. "Oh, my sweet, brave boys," Josie whispered, dropping to her knees. Her voice was not the deferential, hushed tone of a servant, but the warm, melodic sound of a fiercely protective guardian. She immediately wrapped the heavy wool blanket around both children, pulling them into a tight, desperate embrace. "I've got you. It's all right. Josie is here." Leo buried his face in her coarse cotton apron, sobbing quietly. "She locked us in the dark. We're so hungry, Josie." "I know, my little lion, I know," Josie murmured, kissing the top of his head. She opened the wicker basket. The smell of fresh, warm food wafted into the cold air. "Look what I smuggled from the kitchens when the cook wasn't looking. Hot roasted chicken, thick slices of buttered bread, and sharp cheddar cheese. And I managed to steal 2 baked apples with cinnamon." The boys' eyes widened in the candlelight. They ate ravenously, huddled against Josie's side for warmth. As they ate, Josie didn't just sit there. She pulled a worn, leather-bound book from her apron, a book of old Cornish fairy tales. In a soft, animated voice, she read to them, doing different voices for the dragons and knights, making the boys giggle through their tears. For an hour, the cold, miserable attic was transformed into a sanctuary of warmth, laughter, and genuine love. From the shadows of the chimney breast, Arthur watched a single tear track down his own weathered cheek. He had hired a dozen highly paid, credentialed nannies over the years, all of whom treated the boys like fragile porcelain dolls or tedious chores. Yet here was a lowly parlour maid, risking immediate dismissal, public ruin, and a potential charge of theft, simply to ensure 2 little boys did not go to sleep cold and hungry. "Josie?" Theodore asked sleepily, his head resting on her shoulder as the food settled in his small belly. "Will that scary lady be our new mama?" Josie's face tightened with a mixture of sorrow and suppressed anger. She gently stroked Theodore's hair. "I don't know, Teddy. But I promise you this. As long as I have breath in my lungs, I will never let her truly hurt you. I will always be watching." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. The stark contrast between the two women was blinding. Cordelia, dressed in imported silks and dripping with diamonds, was entirely devoid of humanity. Josephine, wearing a stained, coarse uniform and earning mere pennies a week, possessed the nobility and grace of a true queen. Arthur knew he had to end this nightmare immediately. But the politician in him, the strategist who had outmaneuvered the brightest minds in Parliament, held him back. If he stepped out now, Cordelia would play the victim. She would claim she was overwhelmed, that it was a misunderstanding, and her powerful family in Yorkshire would back her, potentially dragging Arthur's name and his son's privacy through a scandalous society trial. No. Arthur realized that simply banishing Cordelia was not enough. She needed to be exposed in a way that would completely ruin her social standing, ensuring she could never manipulate or harm another family again. Furthermore, he needed a way to elevate the woman who had just shown him what true devotion looked like. Arthur silently retreated into the depths of the walls. The trap was set. Now, the Duke of Blackwood was going to let his treacherous fiancée dig her own grave. For 5 agonizing days, Arthur remained a ghost within the walls of his own ancestral home. The physical toll of the cramped, dusty corridors was nothing compared to the emotional lacerations he endured watching his fiancée's tyranny unfold. Cordelia's cruelty was not a sudden explosion of temper, but a cold, calculated campaign to break the spirits of his children and the household staff. She dismissed the elderly head gardener who had served the Blackwood estate since Arthur's grandfather was a boy, simply because the man had failed to tip his hat fast enough. She ordered the locked parlour opened and demanded that Isabella's prized Vienna concert grand piano, an instrument no one had touched since her death, be sold to a local merchant to make room for a vulgar, gilded chaise longue imported from Paris. But her most venomous wrath was always reserved for Leo and Theodore. On the 5th afternoon, disaster struck in the grand hallway. The boys, briefly let out of their confinement to take a mandatory, silent walk around the gardens, were returning indoors. Theodore, exhausted and pale from the meagre rations Cordelia allowed them, tripped over the edge of a heavy Persian runner. As he fell, he crashed into a pedestal, sending a priceless Ming dynasty vase, a gift to Arthur's father from the Earl of Elgin, shattering into 1,000 pieces against the marble floor. The resounding crash brought Cordelia flying out of the drawing room. Her face was contorted with a terrifying rage. "You clumsy, wretched little beasts!" she screamed, her voice cracking like a whip. She grabbed a heavy wooden walking stick from the brass umbrella stand. "I will teach you the price of destroying my property." In his hidden passage, Arthur slammed his shoulder against the oak paneling, searching frantically for the hidden latch to burst into the hallway. He was done waiting. He would kill her with his bare hands if he had to. But before Arthur could break through the wall, a blur of coarse grey cotton threw itself between Cordelia and the weeping 5-year-old. It was Josie. The maid had been polishing the banister nearby. She fell to her knees on the sharp porcelain shards, wrapping her arms completely around Theodore, shielding his small body with her own. "My lady, please! It was my fault!" Josie cried out, her voice trembling, but her posture unyielding. "I was dusting the pedestal and I pushed it too far. The young master merely bumped it because it was out of place. Punish me, your ladyship, I beg of you. Do not strike the boy." Cordelia halted, her chest heaving, the heavy wooden stick raised above her head. She looked down at the lowly parlour-maid with absolute disgust. "You dare interfere with my discipline, you filthy little coal miner's brat." "I am responsible, my lady. Josie repeated, keeping her head bowed, though Arthur could see the blood seeping into the grey fabric of her skirt, where the porcelain shards had cut into her knees. "Dock my wages. Dismiss me." But the Duke would never forgive a mark upon his son. The mention of Arthur's name made Cordelia hesitate. Her eyes darted around the hallway, noting the shocked expressions of the other servants who had gathered at the edges of the corridor. She slowly lowered the cane. "You are a liar, Josephine. But if you wish to take the blame for these miserable orphans, you shall have it," Cordelia hissed. "You are dismissed without a character reference. Pack your meagre belongings and be gone from Blackwood Manor by nightfall. If I see your face again, I will have the local magistrate arrest you for trespassing and theft of my vase." Cordelia turned sharply and stalked back into the drawing room, slamming the door. Josie let out a shuddering breath. She ignored her bleeding knees and gently lifted Theodore, kissing his tear-stained cheek. "Hush now, Teddy. You are safe. Leo, come here. Take your brother's hand." Arthur watched, his vision blurring with unshed tears as Josie limped toward the servants' quarters, carrying the weight of his family's salvation on her fragile shoulders. Arthur knew he had to act immediately. The trap was ready to be sprung. Under the cover of darkness that evening, Arthur finally exited the secret passages through the wine cellar. He slipped into the stables, saddled his fastest stallion, and rode breakneck through the pouring Cornish rain to the village telegraph office. He sent 3 urgent wires. The first was to Lord Harrison Stirling in London. The second was to his formidable aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, a woman whose influence in British high society rivaled that of Queen Victoria herself. The third was to his solicitors in Yorkshire. The telegrams contained a single, unified command: arrive at Blackwood Manor on Saturday evening for a formal dinner. A matter of absolute aristocratic urgency. Speak to no one of my presence. Saturday was the night Cordelia had planned a lavish, opulent dinner party to formally introduce herself as the new mistress of the county to the local nobility. It was the perfect stage. Arthur then circled back to the estate, but not to the manor. He went to the small, damp cottage on the edge of the property, where the dismissed servants lived before moving on. There he found Josie, packing a battered canvas satchel by the light of a single candle, her knees heavily bandaged. When the Duke of Blackwood stepped out of the shadows, shedding his soaking wet cloak, Josie dropped her satchel in shock, dropping into a deep, trembling curtsy. "Your Grace, we thought you were in Edinburgh," she stammered, pale with shock. "Rise, Josephine," Arthur commanded, his voice surprisingly gentle. He stepped forward and looked into the eyes of the woman who had bled for his son. "I haven't been in Scotland. I have been watching. Everything. From the walls." Josie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I know what she is," Arthur said, his jaw tightening. "And more importantly, I know who you are. You are the bravest soul to ever walk the halls of my home. You will not leave this estate, Josie. You will stay hidden here in this cottage until tomorrow night, and then we are going to war." The grand dining hall of Blackwood Manor blazed with 1,000 beeswax candles, illuminating a feast designed to cement Lady Cordelia's absolute reign. She sat at the head of the mahogany table, draped in Parisian silk and wearing the priceless Blackwood sapphires, a blatant, arrogant breach of protocol before the wedding had even taken place. Surrounding her were Cornwall's elite, alongside Arthur's aunt, the formidable Dowager Duchess of Devonshire, and his closest confidant, Lord Harrison Stirling. "Arthur is simply too soft," Cordelia sighed delicately, sipping her champagne. "The twins are terribly destructive. For their own salvation, I fear I must send them to a strictly disciplined boarding school in the north." The Dowager Duchess raised a perfectly arched brow, her expression unreadable. "How pragmatic of you." Suddenly, the heavy oak double doors crashed open against the plaster walls. The string quartet fell dead silent. Arthur Harrington stood in the doorway, shedding a soaked, muddy riding cloak. His eyes locked onto Cordelia with a terrifying, glacial fury that instantly chilled the room. "Arthur! My darling!" Cordelia gasped, hastily pasting on her practiced smile as her chair scraped backward. "You have returned early from Scotland. We were just—" "Silence!" Arthur's command echoed like a thunderclap, pinning the stunned aristocrats to their velvet chairs. He marched across the room, leaving dark mud on the priceless Persian rug. "Where are my sons?" "They are resting," Cordelia stammered, her smile faltering as her throat tightened. "They misbehaved terribly yesterday, shattering your prized Ming vase." "A lie," Arthur spat. He turned toward the dark hallway. "Bring them in." Josephine emerged from the shadows. Dressed now in a respectable navy wool gown by Arthur's secret order, she held Theodore and Leo tightly by the hands. The boys shrank from the intimidating crowd, clinging to the young parlour maid as if she were their only shield in the world. Cordelia's face twisted in unfiltered rage. I dismissed you! Arthur, this filthy thief broke your vase and—" "She broke nothing," Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "I saw Theodore trip over the rug you refused to secure. I saw you raise a heavy wooden cane to strike my 5-year-old son." Gasps rippled down the dining table. "You are mad! You were in Edinburgh!" Cordelia shrieked, panic finally setting in. "I never left Blackwood," Arthur declared loudly. "For 6 days, I lived within the Tudor priest holes, built into the very walls of this house. I watched you lock my starving boys in a freezing attic. I heard you plot to exile my heirs. I witnessed you terrorize my devoted staff." "Lies, it is a trick!" Cordelia looked wildly at the Dowager Duchess. "You must see, he has lost his mind." The Dowager Duchess stood slowly, leaning heavily on her silver cane. "The only madness I see is a monster wearing my late niece's jewelry." Arthur slammed a thick dossier right into the center of the silver table setting. "My solicitors in Yorkshire confirm your family is entirely bankrupt. You sought a treasury to loot, Cordelia, not a family to love." He stepped forward, ripped the Blackwood sapphires from her neck, and pointed to the door. "Your bags are packed. My carriage will take you to the station. If you ever speak my name again, I will ruin you permanently." Humiliated and weeping bitter tears, Cordelia fled into the rainy night. In the stunning silence that followed, Arthur dropped to his muddy knees, pulling his sobbing sons into a desperate, fierce embrace. "I am so sorry," he whispered into their hair. "I will never leave you again." Rising, the Duke of Blackwood turned to Josephine. In front of England's most powerful peers, he took the maid's rough, blistered hand. "Josephine Miller," Arthur announced, "you bled to protect my blood. You are no longer a servant. From this day forward, you are the head of the Blackwood nursery, with a governess's salary and my absolute protection." It was a scandal, of course. But 2 years later, when the Duke finally married the woman who had brought light back to his home, high society could only watch in awe as a true mother took her rightful place. If you were captivated by this tale of hidden truths, aristocratic betrayal, and a love that defied all social boundaries, please like this video, share it with your fellow historical drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you thrilling, scandalous, and heartwarming stories every single week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the drama. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.